What's up guys, Halo Repository back today with another video. Today we are going to be talking about Halo, the graphic novel. So let's just jump right into it. So while I'm working on the script for Halo Ghosts of Onyx and reading Halo Glasslands all at the same time, I thought it'd be fun to try to kind of stick with the, Halo Combat Evolved era story for two reasons. One, it's just been fun to read a lot of these stories through the original Bungie era books and comics. And at the same time, Halo Campaign Evolved releases this month, so why not just keep the ball rolling and celebrate 25 years of Halo with more Combat Evolved-esque stories. So similarly to my last video, Halo The First Strike by Eric Nyland, this book maintains that story within the Combat Evolved era, but it doesn't do anything crazy, just make sure that we really just expand upon those details. You don't need this book to really read or prepare for anything. It's more of just something that just really helps flush out more of what's going on during the events of Halo Combat Evolved, while also kind of building into Halo 2, which we'll obviously talk about a little bit more as we make our way through these stories. So originally I was gonna actually do a video per story, but unfortunately the longest story in this comic is 50 pages, and then after that, I think it's less than 20 pages, probably even 15. I didn't honestly count them all, but it was relatively short where I was like, oh, that's it. So trying to make a video for each one would only be a 5-minute video, which I found to be just a little weird. If you really want me to make separate ones, you can let me know down in the comments. But I think honestly, this video will do it justice just for, kind of talking about each story. And I'm going to go through each one by one and talk about it and do all the fun normal stuff I would normally do with a story. And as always, at the end of the review, I will talk about what you should read, watch, and or play in order to prepare for this book. Spoiler alert, nothing really. The book released July 19th of 2006. For context, as always, this was about a year before Halo 3 released, 2 years after Halo 4. The only other book that had just released at this time, I believe, was Halo Ghosts of Onyx. So again, kind of in this middle way between where we're starting to talk a little bit about what's going to happen in Halo 3, kind of just give those subtle hints, but nothing insane enough to where it's you have to go read this in order to understand anything for Halo 3. So yeah. So each story in here is done by different authors and different artists, which I will talk about briefly at the beginning of each little video. I won't go into too much context of their background. I was reading the foreword, which was done by Lorraine McLeay, who, if you is no stranger to the show, as I have always talked about her work, specifically on things like the cover art for Halo Combat Evolved, or not Halo Combat Evolved, but I do think she did that one. But more specifically for this this channel, Halo: The Fall of Reach, she worked on the original one, of course, and a lot of other great art that I will have pictured up right here on the screen. Now, in her foreword, she talks about how she'd grown up loving comic book stories, all the basic ones that you can think about, like GI Soldiers and Superman, and just a bunch of other stories that she'd read as a child, and they're kind of the reason that she's even in this space today. And what I found cool about this is she talked about the reason that she wanted this book to exist, or this comic to exist, is because she wanted to explore more of what Halo had to offer. Originally, it sounds like when Microsoft and Bungie were kind of thinking about this book, it was more along the lines of just telling, hey, random authors and illustrators, we would like a Halo book or a Halo comic book, go nuts. But for Lorraine, she didn't want that. She wanted it to where it would make more sense that Bungie would kind of spearhead that, kind of say hey, we're going to be the ones to pick the artists, we're going to be the ones to pick the authors, and we're going to be the ones actually giving them stories that we want adapted into these pages, which I find to be cool, because at that point, I think there's a lot of great creative freedom that you can give an author when you say go nuts. But at the same time, this was during an age where Halo books and Halo extended media wasn't what it is today, where we hand them the Halo Bible and they can just reference that. I don't even know if there was a Halopedia. I doubt there was a Halopedia then. So, kind of just letting them go nuts can create inconsistencies within the lore and just strange problems that, of course, we would deal with now today. Probably not so much during the Bungie era because, well, But she wanted to talk about how this book was supposed to be a bit more of an extension of the universe, and to flush out more of those things that we know but don't have the details about. And more specifically, what I find here is that even she herself says that, how do we make it to where Chief isn't just seen as a robot, but in fact a man within the armor, which I think is relatively important to see from the Bungie era, because there's a lot of argument within the community whether 343 has made Chief too human or too soft. And I think it's just right here where, like, even during the Bungie era, it's like, okay, like, obviously the very first Halo game, like, it was just that. There was an idea of Chief just being a silent protagonist, but when you go through years of creating a character, eventually they're gonna have to do some yapping and some sort of character development, or else they grow stale. And I think that's kind of what she wanted to explore. But I do find that a little bit interesting because, to be honest, Chief is not that prevalent in this book, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Now, of course, it's not a book review without talking about the cover. Now, I really love this cover. It was done by Phil Hale, who I will have pictures of other stuff he's done. This is, from what I can tell, his first and only real interaction with the Halo universe. I don't think he did anything else. There's another version of this, but I don't think it's just that dramatically crazy. But as you can see from the cover, it's Master Chief in this like Halo 2 era armor with dual SMGs, kind of diving backwards, firing, and if you swoop to the back, you can see it's just an extension of that. The rest of the cover is just this more like cream pale color look with obviously the giant O, or the Halo-esque O that we see at the end of Halo all the time. And then funny enough, if you take off the dust jacket, I mean, it's still the exact same cover, but it's just all black with like just the lining of the Chief. I don't know if you can see that as perfectly as I can. But yeah, as you can see, like, it's just pretty much just showing that same like look of Chief diving backwards. And overall, I absolutely love this cover. It's actually probably like one of my favorite covers for any Halo comic book that exists. Now, I don't know much about art, but when I was doing some research for this book, basically what I discovered is that Phil Hale specializes in something known as figurative painting, which focuses on like the human body and maintains a very realistic style. And I think just like looking at this, like, that is executed like so well done in this. Like, Chief looks normal, he looks like a human, but what I really love is just the realistic, gritty design of it. There's just something so pleasing about the way this cover looks, the way Chief looks, and overall, like, I have to say, Phil Hale killed it on this. For it being his first, and again, what I can tell, his only interaction with the Halo franchise, well done, like, bravo. This is just perfect. Okay, so with the cover out of the way, let us then jump into the stories that are in this book.
What is it? That stench. I've smelled it before.
So at the beginning of each little story, we have it to where what I assume is Lorraine McLeod kind of giving us a little background into why this story exists. And then at the end of each story, we kind of have like creator's notes where it's like the author talking about like how they got involved in this and all that kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, we get like more information on their background, as well as the background for like the illustrator, like who did it. So for example, this first story that we're gonna be looking at is known as Last Voyage of Infinite Succor. It is by Lee Hammock and illustrated by Simon Bisley. So the author, or not the author, but the person at the beginning of the book, which again I assume is Lorraine McLeod giving us this background, talks about how this story runs parallel with Breaking Quarantine, another story that's going to be shown off in just a few minutes after I'm done talking about Infinite Succor. It was designed to show two major things. One, to give a little bit more credence to the Flood. They didn't want the Flood to be seen as just space zombies. There was a little bit more to them. There's more story, more depth than just being your typical zombies. And so that's kind of like what they wanted to do with this. The second part was to give us a little bit more details into how the Covenant works. Like, what is that inner structure and that interaction between the different species, the different ranks, and all that kind of fun stuff. But this was also made to give us a background into the story of Urtus Vadumi, who we know as Shipmaster or Halfjaw through Halo 2 and Halo 3. This was again just to show like how he knows like the smell of the Flood, how he got his fabled Halfjaw look. All great things that are great to extend upon, but again, not necessary for you to understand Halo 2's full story. So our story starts with Master Chief exiting Foehammer's Pelican at the beginning of 343 Guilty Spark in the swamp. And we kind of see Chief just making his way. And now there's a little bit of a confusion for me personally when I'm looking at both, what's shown in the picture and kind of what's shown on Halopedia. There's a crashed spirit dropship that Chief sees. He kind of pays it no attention, goes about his day, interacts with the flood, and then the mission ends with him being taken by 343 Guilty Spark. But we actually focus on this spirit dropship that eventually ends up leaving the swamp and making its way to Infinite Succor. Now, what I'm saying there's a little bit of confusion here for me personally is my assumption is this crashed spirit dropship is the same one that we see at the beginning of 343 Guilty Spark. It's never really said, and when I look at Halopedia, I didn't see anything that indicated yes, you're correct. Nor did I really see anything that said you're wrong. It could have just been the way that the spirit was crashed looked a little different, but at the same time, it could just be artistic style and representation of the scene. Either way, we see the spirit dropship make its way to the Infinite Succor. It crashes aboard within the hangar bay, and soon after, the flood comes spewing out, attacking these Covenant members, mostly a bunch of grunts who are banging on the doors, pleading for help, and we then cut over to our favorite sub-commander known as Vladimir, who's actually currently in the middle of a training sequence with his second in command, Baro Kusavi. I have his name aboard. They're having a cool little training, just dueling it out, until that is when is summoned by the Supreme Commander to meet with him. As he's making his way to the bridge to meet the Supreme Commander, he tells his troops to prepare to be deployed because more than likely this is, they're going on a mission. And now I have to stop for a moment because when makes his way into this room and meets with the Supreme Commander, two things. I'm going to get made fun of. I have not read this in so long. I remembered seeing it, but I just didn't think about it. But the Supreme Commander in this situation is, of course, Thel 'Vadamine, aka the Arbiter from Halo 2. But what's so cool is Thel in this sequence, I don't know what the drip was, but I kind of need him to bring it back. Because obviously in Halo 2, when he reports to the Hierarchs at the beginning of the game, he's just wearing his gold armor. And we see in Halo 2 terminals, he's wearing that gold armor, but with a purple cloak. But in this sequence, he just looks so much more menacing. He looks towering, he looks powerful, and an omnipotent being because he's in this weird armor, this cloak, and he's in the shadows when he's talking to It's so cool, and I just honestly love the style of it. At the same time, it gives me he looks like a xenomorph, a weird xenomorph from Alien. I don't know what it is, but I really just enjoy the way that the illustrator really stylized Thel 'Vadamine in this sequence. Either way, we see Thel and talk, and Thel pretty much updates him yo, so the Infinite Succor has been boarded by an unknown enemy. We suspect it to be humans. I'm gonna send your men aboard there to try and stop it. There's only realistically probably one human with the gall enough to board one of our ships and take it the way they did. It's definitely got to be the demon. And even yep, that sounds like something the demon would do. So, kind of be prepared. Here, I'm going to give you some command codes. You and your team can use these to access part of the ships that normally you wouldn't have access to because you're not part of the crew, part of the ship. But at the same time, he warns him that the legate, or Minister of Etiology, is aboard of the ship. If he still lives, he will have supreme control over the ship. His codes will override your codes. So just, be prepared for that possibility. Taking a Phantom, and a few of his troops, and of course his second in command, Kusavi, they make their way aboard the ship. And when they get there, they see the chaos, the mayhem, the destruction, and the death. And at first they're a little confused because they notice that grunts, blood is everywhere, but the bodies have been dragged away. So there's a little confusion of, why would humans be intrigued by the dead? Normally they just kill them and move on. As they make their way to a dome that is supposed to be a hunting preserve, they notice again just all this carnage, even dead hunters, and they're this doesn't feel like humanity. Humans are, heretics, they're, ignorant, they're dumb, but the scale of brutality that we're seeing has never been seen before by humans. And so they're creeping their way through this hunting preserve, not seeing any of the normal creatures that they would normally see. That is until one finally comes out. But it is clearly infected by some sort of parasite. and his elites pull out their dual energy blades and just start fighting. And this is when they realize that energy blades have the best effect on this parasite. And so they're fighting off what we obviously know to be the flood. And as they're fighting, Urtos says, hey, we got to fall back to the bridge so that way we can like take control of it, stop whatever's going on. So together they're fighting their way through and they make it to the bridge. As they make it to the bridge, Urtos commands his troops, one of them to start, signaling the other ships around, saying like, hey, fire upon Infinite Succor. There's a parasite. The ship is no longer like deemed like safe. So we need to destroy it and just make sure whatever's on here never gets off. And then he commands another set of troops to prepare the ship's self-destruct. When both teams go do their actions, one hand we find out that communications have been cut off. There's no way to contact the ships outside. And then on the other hand is they're being locked out, and they're even utilizing their command codes that they were given by Velvatamine to take control of the ship, and those are being overridden. This is when the Legate, aka Minister of Etiology, who we're just going to say the minister from now on, reveals himself and essentially says that he is he's overriding their command codes because he doesn't know if they are infected by what he literally says, the flood. He cannot trust them. And Urtos is like, you got to give us control so we can destroy the ship. And the minister is like, okay, how about this? Come to the medical bay. I can scan you remotely and make sure none of you are infected. And Urtos goes to fight back. That is until a few of his troops that had fallen since they were leaving the reserve breaks in as a flood combat form. And so together they all start fighting. They destroy the bridge controls to ensure that this parasite cannot take control. Because what we find out is that a lot of the doors that they've been shutting with their command codes are now suddenly opening. And this makes Urtos realize, this parasite can utilize our codes. Interesting. At the medbay, the minister scans them and he confirms, yep, you are not infected. Come one floor down. I'm hiding in my little hidden room that no one on the ship knew about, and there we can discuss. And we see Urtos getting aggravated because he's just trying to make sure that like he can stop what's ever going on the ship while he's getting the runaround from this very obnoxious prophet or minister. In this hidden chamber with the Minister of Etiology, the minister starts to talk about he knows what this is. This is the flood. This is one of the many obstacles that we will have to go through in order to, find Halo and activate it and start the great journey. He notes to Urtos that ever since this parasite boarded, they have grown smarter, strategic, and they have been able to maneuver around the ship in greater numbers, and they're basically setting up strategic points around certain spaces, such as the engine room. And this makes him realize that even though the ship's currently somewhat disabled, they are trying to access the slipspace drive so that way they can leave the system. And now, while he can certainly stop them for a brief time, these new command codes that Urtos' team has brought aboard, which have now been assimilated with the flood, will eventually be able to, crack through whatever the minister does. And at the same time, we learn that the pilot of this ship has been infected. So therefore, the flood knows how to use the ship, and they know how to escape. This is when the minister turns to Urtos and says, yo, so how are you going to get me off the ship? Because that's important. At the same time, you need to destroy the ship because that is also important. And Urtos goes, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to split up our forces. One group with my sub-commander, Kusavai, being in charge is going to take you and get back to our phantoms to try and contact the other ships and get them to fire upon Infinite Succor, while me and my few other men are going to go to the engines and try and activate the subspace drive to basically have this ship go into the sun. And the minister goes, this is a very terrible idea. Your job is to protect me, and splitting up your forces is not going to help that. You need to just protect me. We can just fire upon them when we get off the ship. And I think this is the most valid crash out I've ever seen, because right here, Urtos just straight up says no, your plan is dumb, and quite frankly, it's a waste of my time. My duty is to protect the Covenant, not to you. So he grabs the minister, puts him in a chokehold, and then slams him to the ground and basically says it's easier for me just to say you died in action than to save you. And this is the type of stuff we've seen in things like Halo Silent Storm, when finally the Sangheili have had enough of certain Sanshayum. They're just annoying. They're just in the way. And I think it's it just goes to show that pent up anger that still exists between the Sangheili and the Sanshayum. But right here, I just love what Urtos does. He slams him down to the ground, and together, the troops still go about their ways, and here's where there's a little bit of confusion. On one end from Halopedia, it sounds like he basically killed the minister. Like, he's been pretty much, I mean, the frame that is shown, and if I have a picture of it, I'll have it right here. It looks like his head was just cracked open. So more than likely, yeah, the minister died right there. But at the same time, there is from what Halopedia says, is a misprint where the minister is like leaving with the group. I think there's just confusion on whether like maybe the minister was put in his place and is finally just shutting up, or if Urtos actually killed him and just left him. I don't know. I don't care. We'll get to why I don't think it's as important which one happens here in just a few moments. So within these last few pages, there's less talking and more action. Urtos and his team get to, close to the engine room, and they're just fighting a non-stop wave of flood. And this is such a cool sequence because we just see like Urtos and his elites just battling out with energy swords and the flood. We see his teammates falling one by one, eventually to the point where one of them, it's just one left standing, falls to the ground and like looks to Urtos and says, please, like, I don't want to become one of them. And Urtos says, you won't, and like bisects this elite from head to like chest, basically making it impossible for a flood infection form to get in and turn him into a combat form. It's such a beautiful sequence. As he makes his way to the engines, he discovers that the Minister of Etiology had been assimilated by the flood. Because now you get this like almost grave mine looking thing where it's like almost like the worm type body, but the head is of the minister. And it's just sitting there basically trying to egg on Urtos, saying like, this is pointless. We're going to get it out of here. The foreigners can stop us. What makes you think you can stop us? And Urtos is like, yeah, buddy, I'm gonna win. And so as he's activating like the slip space drives to go into the sun, he then hears a door open and he turns to find his second in command, Kusavai, who is now a flood combat form. And so then we again see this duel between Urtos and his second in command, where once it was just training at the beginning of the story is now a very real fight to the death. And it's a great fight. It's a great sequence. We see some of the same combat moves that were shown at the beginning. And one of the coolest scenes is when it almost looks like that Kusavai, the flood infected form, has the upper hand because he like has the energy seared go through Urtos's left hand. So you see it go through his like whole arm and come out and like burn this side of the face, severing that mandible, making him the half jaw. But as he does this, we realize that Urtos allowed this opening because it created an opening for him to activate his energy swords and bisect Kusavai in half. It's such a great sequence, and I'll have pictures of it right here. And there's a scene after where you see like Urtos holding his arm like this, and it just looks burnt and scaly, and then you have like the half face burnt. So good, guys. It's so good. We then cut to Urtos basically getting egged on once again by the flood minister, but he makes his way to the spirit dropship, and we see the spirit leave the ship, assuming that both the thing blows up going into the sun, and that's the end of the story. Overall, this was a great story. I think the artwork is so cool. I mean, obviously, like I said, Thel's design goes insanely hard. The scene where Urtos is holding his arm and his face is just messed up, so good. It's amazing artwork. I love the way the elites look. I think this is honestly like one of the best art designs I've seen for most of the comic books. Obviously we haven't gotten through many of them, but this was just chef's kiss. And it's roughly 50 pages long that I think the author did a phenomenal job with the story that like, at one end, I want more because it's so good, but on the other end, I'm satisfied not like needing more. I think this was perfectly well done. And I think it just helps with those little small callbacks. So if you read this and then you go play Halo 2, you're gonna see those like small things where Urtos walks into the room, smells the air, and Thel's like, what is it? And he's like, that stench. I've smelt it before. And then of course, having this weird like personal relationship between the Arbiter and Urtos, not like a good one, but one where it's kind of like, Urtos kind of like, he knows Thel, and he kind of goes like, yeah, bro, you're the Arbiter. Like, I only care about my men now. Like, it's like these two have known each other. At one point, Thel was Urtos' supreme commander, and now he's just the Arbiter. But yeah, overall, I think that Last Voyage of Succor is such a great story. Highly recommend it. Let's go into the next one.
The plating was about to fail. There's viscosity throughout the gel layer. Optics, totally fried. And let's not even talk about the power supply. You know how expensive this gear is, son?
Tell that to the Covenant.
So the next one is known as armor testing, and similar to, if not really similar actually, compared to Infinite Succor, it is severely short. Armor testing was written by J. Fairbeer, I hope I'm saying that right, and the art was done by Ed Lee and Andrew Robinson. At the beginning, it is discussed that they wanted to tell a story that was referenced in Halo 2, but wasn't necessary for the story. And another really important part about it is that the focus on was to talk about how the armor was bigger than Chief. It wasn't just tied to him, it was tied to all Spartans, and that anyone can wear the armor, obviously so long as they're a Spartan, but it's not like Master Chief is the only one who gets armor. It wasn't designed specifically just for him. It was designed for this group of amazing warriors. So at the beginning of the story, we see a Pelican dropship in low orbit. And inside we see this Spartan who looks like they're getting prepared to jump out. We then switch over to this command center where we see all these people kind of watching, observing, and monitoring both the Spartan, their vitals, as well as the armor status, seeing how it holds up to battle, to going through atmosphere and all this kind of stuff. And this is where this commanding officer, who I don't think is ever named, basically asks the Spartan, now dubbed Spartan 062, if they're ready to go. With that, the Spartan jumps out and is making its way through orbit. Everyone in this command center is amazed by just the feat that this normal person, well not normal, but this human can go through. And this is where the officer's this is a Spartan, this is what they do, this is a day in a life. The closer the Spartan gets to the ground, it unslings its sniper and starts shooting at what looks like Covenant members. But then, just before, it cuts off its airfoil, essentially a parachute, and lands really hard on the ground, creating this shockwave. And then this is where we come to find out that this Spartan is now surrounded by 5 ODSTs, and that the what looks like Covenant were in fact dummies, when in reality they're training against ODSTs. So of course we see our beautiful, lovely ODST versus Spartan love. And of course this Spartan beats these ODSTs with ease, just going round and round. And this Spartan's wearing what is now known as Mark 6 Gen 1 armor. And after the Spartan takes out the hostiles, basically utilizing this pink paint to show yep, you're dead. Similar to what I would assume is in Red versus Blue when they do the training facility with the meta and all that kind of stuff. Spartan 062 takes them out with ease and then gets shot at from another building. Doesn't get hit, but is able to now go, hey, there's someone over in that window. I would take them out from here because it would be easy, but I'm gonna go inside. Going inside, the Spartans actually jumped by roughly 20 ODSTs, and then we cut to now these ODSTs and the Spartan returning, where we find out the Spartan technically lost the test, because it was overpowered by this many ODSTs. But it was all fun and games because, they're all connecting, no one's mad, no one's fighting, it's just this good soldier brotherly love. And so as they're reporting to this commanding officer, the officer says hey, Maria, how was the armor? And how was it being back on the field? And this is where the Spartan takes off the helmet, revealed to be a woman named Maria 062, who says that, on one end she loved being back on the field, but she doesn't regret retiring to start a family. And at the same time, she then explains that the armor felt good. It felt natural. It felt like it was part of her. It didn't feel bulky. It just felt perfect. She then asks where's this armor being sent to? And this is where the commanding officer looks at his little data pad and goes, oh, it's being shipped to a MCPO John 117 aboard Cairo station. And this is kind of a funny little bit of dialogue where Maria goes, MCPO John 117? John from Reach John? And I'm how many John 117s are there that anyone knows? I think it was kind of funny, but at the same time, I get what she was trying to do here. But she says that once Chief gets this armor, she thinks they're all going to be sleeping a little bit better. That's the end of that story. I think it's cool. I mean, there isn't much to the story. There isn't really anything that really pushes anything other than just being oh, so that's what the whole point of at the beginning of Halo 2 when that, I can't remember his name and I'm gonna get yelled at, but I don't remember many names, where that person who's testing Chief in his armor in Halo 2 goes, your armor just came up from Songnam this morning. This is what was happening this morning in Songnam, Korea.
Well, I guess it was all obsolete anyway. Your new suit's a Mark 6. Just came up from Songnam this morning. Try and take it easy until you get used to the upgrades.
You know, Maria was testing the armor for Chief, and now it's being sent to Chief, who's wearing it at the beginning of Halo 2. I think it's just one of those really good things of like fleshing out parts of the story, but isn't necessary for you to enjoy the story. It just, again, it builds on it. I think it's good. I love the dialogue. I love the fight between the Spartan and the OSTs. It's short, it's quick, it's sweet, it's perfect.
What is that?
Where's that coming from, Mendoza?
I don't... There! Mira!
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many,
Don't
Sarge!
even think about it, Marine.
Oh, this is local!
Get back here, Marine. Jenkins!
The third story is known as Breaking Quarantine, and this story is interesting because it's told with zero dialogue. And I'm not lying, there's not a single word that is in this story. It's all visual, a lot of show with visual tell. You get what's going on, you understand what's going on, so long as you've played Halo Combat Evolved. But overall, this artist's name for these panels is a Japanese artist named Nihei Tsutomi. And the idea behind this story was to try and expand upon like the extended lore in the games. We understand that, in Halo 1, Johnson was kind of just a side character where he disappears after, the whole Flood being released in 343 Guilty Spark. But then obviously with both First Strike and Halo 2, we see Johnson survive and he's back, and we just don't ever get answers. First Strike doesn't explain how Johnson lived, but it shows how he got back to Earth and back home in one piece. This shows you how he survived the encounter. And so this is gonna be interesting because again, there's no dialogue and it's very brief, but I'm excited to really talk about this. So we start off with Johnson and Jenkins being attacked by Flood infection forms. Johnson kills his own little Flood form and then turns and shoots the one that's attacking Jenkins. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save Jenkins, as Johnson now is looking down upon the dead carcass of Jenkins. But then, much to Johnson's surprise, the corpse of Jenkins just stands up. And Johnson's like taken aback for a minute. And then this Jenkins Flood that we all know and love at Halo, the Flood, like whacks Johnson, sending him across the room. There's a little bit of a weird inconsistency with the room design where they're supposed to be in versus where he's getting like hit around. It's very weird. I don't think I'm gonna focus on it because again, it's just artistic interpretation. But yeah, we see Johnson get thrown around and then he escapes out of the room and locks the door that Master Chief will later unlock later in the story of 343 Guilty Spark. Just as he does this, he turns around to find a Flood form holding a shotgun. It shoots, but he's able to dodge, pull out his or use his AR to shoot it, runs out of ammo, swaps it for his Magnum, and fights his way through this Flood Forerunner facility. And we see all the classic rooms that we as the character played upon. We even see the bridge that was once activated get deactivated as Johnson's midway through and he jumps just at the right time to land on the other side, take out these Flood members, gets to the elevator, and he makes his way up and out of the research facility. And that's it. That is the story. Again, it's really quick, it's really short. A lot of it is just kind of retracing the steps that we as the character would have taken to get to that part in the game. But in my honest opinion, Nihei Tsutomi did phenomenal with this art. And actually, I'm not gonna lie, it might be the best art design for this level. I think even he says it, he's played the game, he loves the game, and he had the mission on in the background while he drew everything. And he said he hopes he did a good job. But not only did he do a good job, I think he did the best job. There's just a lot of dark blues and grays and blacks that made the research facility feel just terrifying and overall sinister. Like if I was walking through here without the Flood, I would feel scared and terrified. And this is no criticism to the author or the artist, because his job was just to design a story through visuals. But I wish there was more. I think it's so good, it's so well done, but I wanted more from it. Maybe some dialogue would have just helped it, but overall it's all visual. There's no dialogue whatsoever, but I think it's so good. But overall, I'm not gonna complain too much because the art design is phenomenal. I think if you just want to see how Johnson survived that last moment we see where, Jenkins gets taken by the flood combat form, you're gonna love this story. But once again, the art designer, chef's kiss. The foreigner design, the flood, of course, the man himself, Johnson. Everything just looks so good. The last story is known as Second Sunrise over New Mombasa. Now, this one was written by Brett Lewis and illustrated by Jean Mobius Giroud, which I think is funny for a main reason, because the main character for this one is known as Benjamin Giroud, who I feel like a lot of us know from either this, but if you've never read it, then you probably know him from at least Halo 5's Hunt the Truth podcast, played by Keegan-Michael Key. Me personally, I wish they could have gotten Key back for the Halo Waypoint Chronicle story, where it's Ben Giroud once again telling a story. I just would have loved that, but again, no harm, no foul. The greater point about this story was try to show like the human side of Halo. This non-Spartan, focus on Foreigner and Covenant-esque part. Because when we think about it, when we get to New Mombasa in Halo 2, it's evacuated. There's no signs of life. Everyone who was here is gone. We get a little bit more of that in Halo 3 ODST, but of course when this comes out, ODST is 3 years away from being made. So this is just to give credence to this was a real city, and here's what everyone was doing within New and Old Mombasa. We start with a narration. All of this whole story is a narration by Ben Giroud, who explains that he's basically a photographer and also a guy who works for the Office of Naval Intelligence, essentially taking photos, either ones that he's taken or photos that he's been given by other parts of the galaxy of the war. And basically what he does is they could be the most gruesome photo ever, but he praised them up and makes them more digestible for the public, essentially creating propaganda. And it's something where he kind of is having a moral problem with. On one end, he's happy to help show off get people into the war to help fight it, but at the same time, he's hiding most of the truth. And it's even where we find out that the cover art for Halo 2 has now been canonized because he was the one who edited that picture. And I don't remember if this got released alongside this story. I think it was during the Hunt the Truth stuff. I'll have to research it more. But this picture right here is what's known as the full real picture of the Master Chief. You can see there's a dead Covenant member, and then there's a lot more ships. Whereas if you swap over to the actual Halo 2 cover art, there's no dead Covenant. It's much more zoomed on the Chief, and there's much less Covenant in the background, giving the semblance of there's a hero rising and he's going to take on the Covenant, we're safe. Anyways, on his way to work, Giroud and the rest of the passengers see the attack on Earth start. And as this happens, debris falls down upon their train, knocking Giroud out. He later wakes up inside of a hospital and, kind of comes to realization, watching, Marines, UNSC come in and say, any able man, we need you out here to help fight this war. This is your time to step up. And Ben goes with them. And while he's doing this, he comes across a few elites talking, and he's able to translate what they're saying. And right here, and I'll read it for you, he finds out that what they say is, we need to clear this area before we can secure access to the Ark. And what I love about this is because we know in Halo 2 and ODST, the whole reason that the Covenant even came here was to find the Ark. And they know that the Ark's access, or maybe the Ark itself, is somewhere in this city of New Mombasa, which actually ends up being more closer to Voyage, Kenya, that we see. Once Giroud gets this intel, he's then told by this UNSC officer saying yo, this detail or this intel is important. You need to get out of the city so you can get it back to high command. So Giroud makes his way to a barge or a waterfront to secure safe passage out of the city. When he gets there, he sees people piling up, and more than likely, he could make it on there relatively with ease, especially given the intel he has. But then he looks and sees this little girl crying, and she's crying and she's completely alone, and he realizes in his head that this barge is pretty much full, and he can get off because of the intel he has, but she's not gonna get out. So what does he does? again, with that guilt of what he's done for Oni, he gives this intel to this little girl. And he like escorts her to this barge and is able to get her safe passage out of the city. As she leaves, he heads back into the city. I don't know if he goes back to his job. It's never really explained. It looks like it though, but he goes inside this room where you can see monitors of all the destruction and chaos going on. Kind of just comes to this resolve that like, you know, like, hey, today's the end of the world. What are you gonna do? And it's basically makes the assumption or implication that more than likely he might have just died in there. We obviously know now that he didn't, but at this point, who knows if Benjamin Monroe was ever supposed to show up again. And that's how this story ends. Overall, I think it's a sweet story. I don't think it's my favorite, to be honest, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the art design and the design of Benjamin Jarode. He's actually like one of my favorite characters because of Keegan-Michael Key. I love Key and Peele, but I just didn't really like the design of pretty much anything, if I'm gonna be absolutely honest. It's no insult to the artist. I just didn't vibe with it. I think that's fine. If you loved it, perfect. You know, that's your own artistic, you know, love and passion. Great. But overall, I will admit, you know, I enjoyed having it to where Ben went from going like, I'm having this moral dilemma to making the right choice by the end of the story. I think it was really good character growth that we see transform into the Hunt the Truth podcast, where now he's trying to uncover the truth and doesn't care about what Oni's gonna do to him. And that is it. That is Halo the graphic novel. As I kind of discussed my overall thoughts and opinions, I'm gonna show off a bunch of pictures just on the screen. These were all images that a bunch of artists basically, you know, submitted to Bungie. The idea is like, you know, they couldn't use everyone's artwork for this book, but they wanted to make sure those who had wanted a chance to at least portray something did get the chance. And there's a lot of people in here who have great artwork, like Isaac Hannaford, who's synonymous in the community and within Halo. Of course, Lorraine McLean has a piece in here because she's just, you know, she's her. She is her. And of course, Frank O'Connor has one of Mr. Chief. Overall, what I'm saying is a lot of these images were just made specifically for this book and specifically for this section that is just a bunch of great artwork. I'm gonna try and showcase as much as possible while I finish up this video. So for me personally, I think that The Last Voyage of Infinite Succor is by far the best story in this book. Both story and art style was just, in my opinion, perfect. There wasn't really much I would change about it. It is the longest story in the book, but at times I wished it was longer because I enjoyed it that much. And the rest I think are fun. I think a lot of them are really good, but I wanted more from any of them, and more specifically from Breaking Quarantine, which I made, you know, obvious with my review of it. I think it's a great story. The artwork is phenomenal, but man, did I just wish we had a little bit more of that section, and just seeing more of Johnson is always just such a good thing, which is probably why I love Operation Meteorite for Halo Campaign Evolved. And then Armor Testing and Second Sunrise over New Mombasa are kind of in the same lane for me. I think both are cool, but not really that crazy to me where I'm just kind of like in awe of them. Just kind of like, yeah, those are good stories. They really flesh out those different parts of the universe you don't think about, or maybe you just wanted a little bit more details about, or overall just fun and just good. I don't think that I'm gonna really say like one is better than the other. I just think they're fun, they're cool. Not my favorite, but they're good. I recommend them. Now, what should you watch, read, and or do play to prepare for Halo the graphic novel? Honestly, just play Halo Combat Evolved. Realistically, there isn't much in this book that is referenced or being referenced from any other media or books. Obviously, by this point, it's 2006, so there's only like 5 stories. Anything after that takes place after, which case I will talk about how this can be of better use later on for things like Halo 2. But overall, it's just doing kind of what Halo the Flood did, which is build a little bit more upon that era of Combat Evolved, different characters, and also bridging the way ever so slightly towards the next game, Halo 2. Of course, we had that little tiny mention of the arc for Halo 3, but again, it's not necessary, it's not important for understanding anything else really. Like, you do not need to read this to understand First Strike. You can definitely read it to help, you know, see how Johnson got out of there. He doesn't really explain it in First Strike, but it might be good help for you to, you know, kind of see. You could read this in order to, you know, understand a little bit more about Urtus Vadami and how he knows the Arbiter, or Thel Vadami, or how he got half-jawed, or how he even knows what the Flood smells like. I think that's like, this book does more to support other things rather than much of it being support or like anything else really supporting it other than Combat Evolved. But that is pretty much it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what your favorite story and or art style from this book is, and I will see you guys in Halo Ghosts of Onyx.